Hi, welcome everybody. We're doing our presentation on software crises, specifically healthcare.gov. Our group members are Lindsay Moeller, Daniel Blankenship, and Tyler Stanley. Tyler has an emergency tonight, so Lindsay and I will be stepping in for him. Next slide.
So in the Software's Chronic Crisis article that we recently read, the author said, the average software development project overshoots its schedule by half. Larger projects generally do worse, and some 3/4 of all large systems are operating failures that either do not function as intended or are not used at all. And when healthcare.gov was rolled out on October 1st, 2013, it was one of these operating failures. Some have even gone so far as to call it one of the worst IT disasters in history. So it was the insurance exchange website for the Affordable Care Act, which was also known as Obamacare. And its purpose was to allow residents of 36 states, which were the states that chose not to create their own exchanges, to facilitate the sale of their own private health insurance plans. And the site was supposed to allow users to compare prices for different health insurance plans in their state. And many people say it was doomed from the start because of major budget overages. The proposed budget was $93.7 million, but it grew to $292 million before the site even went live, and totaled $1.7 billion when it was all said and done. Some estimates even say that only 1% of the people trying to enroll were able to successfully do that within the first week. One study blamed the administration for not providing effective planning or oversight practices during development. So next slide.
And so going along with what Lindsay was talking about the 1%, I also included that on how it failed. A couple of reasons specifically of why it was kind of doomed from the beginning is that there were multiple private contracts from multiple different development companies. Now this could work okay, however, there wasn't a lot of communication between the groups. Just as Lindsay was saying, it was unusable to thousands right from the start, and the bugs just kept on coming. Here's a couple quotes about possible reasons as to why it failed. It says the employees themselves were not fully trained, and they failed to monitor companies, their spending, and their work on healthcare.gov. Bloomberg reported in one instance, 5 different employees oversaw a single contract over the course of 5 years, but who was in charge wasn't always documented. Other employees who had not received requisite training in order to oversee government projects were nonetheless placed in charge. Overall, the mismanagement led to millions of dollars in cost overruns. Going into a little bit more detail on the 1% quote, it says, Millward Brown Digital, a consulting firm, reports that a mere 1% of the 3.7 million people who tried to register on the Federal Exchange in the first week actually managed to enroll. They also go on to say it was unuseful to hundreds of thousands of Americans who wanted to enroll. Screens wouldn't load. A woman trying to get help via web chat was told to please be patient, an infuriating 40 times. Despite pledges from Obama administration officials that the glitches would be quickly fixed, the list of bugs and problems kept growing. The engineers of Development Seed are not heroes of a revolution, he continues. They are government subcontracts who did their assigned job using best practices. So one of the contractors actually did a very good job, the people doing the front end development. However, what failed to sync up is that when they put the front end with the back end of the project, nothing was communicating. The end result was a front end that worked even if the rest of healthcare.gov didn't. We were disappointed with the launch because we wanted to buy healthcare for our own team. And that's in reference to the Development Seed company that worked on the front end. Next slide.
So one of the main reasons healthcare.gov failed was because there was really no testing period. There was no proper testing for bugs or other errors, and basically what was released had unfinished code fragments that should have been caught during a testing period. There were claims that the schedule shrunk from months to weeks, which didn't allow for that proper testing. So again, the system was an operating failure. And in addition to not being properly tested for bugs, The security of the system also went unchecked, which had holes that were able to be exploited. Next slide. So similar to what I just talked about for Tyler, some of the underlying root causes as to why the healthcare.gov site failed was mainly a lack of oversight. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, deliberately ignored recommendations from management practices from the Software Engineering Institute, namely scheduling, estimating effort needed, monitoring practices, and milestone reviews. The schedule created didn't include many development activities or a timeline, and progress and milestones were never completed or reviewed. And then in addition to the lack of oversight by CMS was the lack of oversight by the Office of Management and Budget. They were supposed to be responsible for analyzing, tracing, and evaluating the risk of major capital investments. However, they never reviewed healthcare.gov. Unclear requirements or specifications were another cause. The contractor that won the bid to build the system was awarded its $94 million contract in December of 2011. But because the government was slow in issuing their specifications, that company didn't start writing code until spring of 2013. And as late as the last week of September, officials were still determining and changing features of the site and even debating the general process for how the system should work, which was whether consumers should be required to register and create an account before shopping for the different plans. And then another cause was that the size of the team working on the system was just too big. The website should have taken a small team of 5 to 10 people just a few months to complete on a $10 million budget, but it was instead worked on by a team of 300 people, and they had a $2 million budget. So it just grew too big for anyone to pay attention and oversee everything that was happening. And as Daniel had said, there was no communication between some of those teams. And then another cause was the fact that there is a system of regulations that rewards contractors that are better at bidding on giant federal contracts than at building software. So rather than rewarding the best man for the job, they rewarded the best bidder for the job. And then lastly, a journalist from Bloomberg Businessweek summed it up by saying, regardless of your opinions on the healthcare law, this is the wrong way to make software. In the meantime, it's clear that tens of millions of dollars have been spent to launch something broken. Next slide.
So going into a little bit more about how much this cost, which seems to be a recurring theme. Another quote says, as you may remember, back in May, we were told by the Department of Health and Human Services, Secretary Sylvia M. Burrell, that the cost of building healthcare.gov totaled $834 million, glitches and all. HHS's Office of Inspector General provided its own estimate of $800 million. However, that $800 million price tag is roughly 40% of the actual cost of the defective website. According to a new report produced by Bloomberg Government, the cost of healthcare.gov is closer to $2,142 million than $834 million. The difference is mostly due to the fact that according to BGOV, the administration's estimates omit some pretty significant costs, such as the budgetary cost of the IRS, which among other things is doling out subsidies through healthcare.gov and other agencies. That discrepancy accounts for $387 million. Another $300 million comes from omitting the contracting costs for processing paper applications as backup in case of the failure of the website. Another $255 million comes from using a different time frame. BGOV uses a longer one than HHS does, but as the report notes, the Burrell and OIG estimates stopped counting just as a major drive got underway to make permanent repairs to healthcare.gov. And that's from nationalreview.com. So one of the big things that I noticed personally as I was getting ready for this presentation is that there's a lot of discrepancies around how much it actually cost. But that's probably due to the lack of organization from the very beginning going forward. Next slide. And then we've also included a couple more quotes, and this is more specific to the actual process of development. It says, we know the project's failure was systemic, multiple failures on multiple levels, but we don't know exactly what did happen. Identifying all the issues might make for a good book someday. Putting together the lessons here, though, and you'll see a pattern. Healthcare.gov was a single big bang rollout that couldn't be stopped. If you can take only one thing from healthcare.gov, it's this: use incremental approaches such as betas, early testing, and regular delivery of a completely tested system in tandem with flexible scope to find risk before it finds you. So we mentioned earlier that one report says that the testing period went from a planned months to a few weeks at the very end. The one interesting point is that since there are multiple contractors, the development team working on the front end ended up using good modern development techniques, and their product came through fine. However, the back end did not. So a lack of communication, and also what it says in the second quote, a single big bang rollout, illustrates the difference between the front end and the back end teams, and good programming practices versus not so good. Next slide. And here are our list of reviews in closing. Thank you very much.